Un saludo muy cordial, tengan todos muy buenos días. Hoy es miércoles 16 de junio.
Welcome all to the session on Wednesday. We are starting a few minutes late. Welcome to the second session of the IOM with the RCM, with Organizations of the Diaspora, for the strengthening of migration and the development of communities through safe and affordable remittances. And this is the International Day of Remittances. So we're really happy for you to be with us, and we would like to thank the PPT of Mexico, the Working Group on Labor Migration, and IOM, whose support has made this activity possible. In accordance with the policies of mass media dissemination, which was distributed to member countries, the dissemination or transmission in whole and part of this information is forbidden. It is property of the RCM and its member countries. So any request for dissemination or reproduction has to be managed or requested through the Executive Secretariat. We will always indicate you how to proceed. We are recording this particular activity, and if the countries decide so, it could, that recording can be uploaded to the YouTube channel only. We have interpretation. You can choose your language, and if you're not requesting the floor, we have a better hearing. So you can close your microphones, please. And we welcome you to this second session of the Regional Forum. Yesterday, we had the presentation of the study by IOM on involving diasporas of Central America and Mexico, opportunities and challenges. We have an executive summary, which was sent to you via email. And we had some working sessions with very interesting recommendations, and we will document them with you. And we also talked in the first group, ties with communities of origin, and second, with countries of destination, and three, sending remittances and their productive use. And for an active dialogue to take place with the experts that we have with us today, we are going to start according to the agenda. So, economic measurement of the contribution of diasporas. We will have Mr. Roberto Cancel from IOM. He's worked with migrant populations and diasporas for over a decade, focusing on civic participation and the link between migration and development. He has acquired diverse experiences from Asia to Africa to Europe and the Americas. Before his current position at the regional IOM, he covered Northern Africa and Middle East from 2017 to 2019 for the Cairo Regional Office. And then after coming to the region as coordination officer. And he was also before project management with the participation of diaspora between 2010 and 2014 in Kosovo. And it is because he has working with Latin American communities in Belgium. So for information services for the Americas migrants, and also in the U.S., UNIDOS U.S. of the National Council of La Raza in the U.S. Mr. Cancel has a master's in culture and rights and development from the Lutheran Catholic University and international affairs and anthropology from Florida State. He's also a member of diaspora himself, being Puerto Rican origin, and he also always strives to show this positive link by empowering migrants as agents of change and economic development and growth. So I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Cancel, and Mr. Cancel, you have the floor. Thank you for that kind introduction and allowing me to share with you. And let's share the desktop. So please let me know if you can see it. So I know we don't have a lot of time, and if there are any questions, I can answer them. But today we are going to be looking at economic measurement of the diaspora's contribution beyond remittances. It is the International Day of Remittances, of course, but we are going to go a bit beyond and see how we can go beyond that. What other contribution the diasporas have? The importance of this measurement is also in Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, Goal 10.7 to facilitate migration and mobility in an orderly fashion, secure, regular, and responsible, even through the application of planned and well-managed migration policies. So in order to have them, we need data as evidence for planning and developing those policies and to monitor them and their impacts. In addition to 10.7, we can also look at 17.18 with the commitment of the countries to increase significantly the availability of timely, reliable, and quality data broken down or disaggregated by income, etc., including migration status. Remember that the Global Compact for Migration is also tied to Goal 10.7, and the compact has a specific objective 19 on creating necessary conditions for migrants and diasporas to be able to contribute fully for sustainable development in all countries. And we also have the commitment to facilitate contributions of migrants and diasporas to their countries of origin, also referring the formulation of migration and development policies to achieve that. And another commitment on the same objective to prepare support programs and specific financial products to facilitate investment and entrepreneurship of the migrants and diasporas. So we will see how we can have more data on how the diasporas invest or how they drive commerce or businesses. And in the Global Compact, we have objective number 1 of gathering using precise and disaggregated data. And 23 to strengthen international cooperation and global partnerships, which are also relevant for today's topic. So how do we have this initiative? How did we develop it? Well, at IOM, we saw that there's systematic endemic lack of data on the contribution of the diasporas and beyond remittances, which leads or has led to an overemphasis on remittances because it's the only data everybody more or less has on the contributions of migrants and diasporas. to their own countries of origin. We have national data, regional data, and global data on remittances, and usually that's it. And if you talk to any government, it is the figure they can refer to. The problem is that we can forget about all the other contributions migrants or members of the diaspora contribute to their countries of origin. For example, of yesterday's report on other contributions of members of the diaspora. And we see great potential for investment and charity organizations or philanthropy. And when we have an overemphasis on remittances in particular, we can forget policies that they do not take into account something very important about remittances. These are private money transfers. For example, if we can capture 10% of the remittances, say the government, for productive projects, we would have great impact. But the remittances have an impact on the health, education, etc. of the recipient. They have already been earmarked, if you will, and have a very important role to play in the life of sustainability of many communities. And it is questionable whether we would like to capture that money, which is already been sent privately and is personal money. And the money has been sent for a very specific purpose: education, healthcare, buy a little piece of land, whatever. It is the decision of the sender or the recipient what to do with the funds. We cannot change them. And if the countries would like to drive investment in productive projects, we would have to talk with the diasporas and the migrants, not only as senders, receivers, but as potential investment partners or businesses. So another type of dialogue to get this investment in productive endeavors would have to be carried out. And we also have to take into account that remittance cannot or should not replace public strategies for investment and development. In Africa, we have had hospitals being built, but if there's no investment in maintaining the building or hiring people to operate it, that investment will not be sustainable. And finally, remittances by themselves cannot correct structural inequalities because usually the poorest of the poor cannot send somebody abroad so they can contribute or send something back. Yes. I am not going to go into details, but I want to just highlight we have both positive and negative impacts of remittances, as with everything else. And we need then to have a more nuanced picture of what remittances can do and cannot do. They can alleviate poverty, provide basic needs, and what the remittances cannot do, as for example, replacing national public investment and development strategies, they should not or cannot replace them. So what I want to present to you today is a manual or guide for contributions and accounting for them. And we have seen other types of economic contributions of the diasporas and migrants to see how we can capture these data on these economic contributions using methods for data collection that we have in the different countries. The idea is to have a practical manual or handbook with 6 specific steps and 18 specific actions. We also included 14 case studies on countries that are already implementing some of these initiatives, and also 13 practical tools. So, in a nutshell, the handbook is going to have, of course, an introduction, the 6 steps that you can see on your right to measure contributions of the diaspora, and then each of them will have then their ancillary actions. So we can capture the data on that particular economic contribution of the diaspora. So it would be a stage process in for short, medium, and long term. Chapter 3, we see the different options, technical techniques, methodologies to be able to adapt these data gathering systems or adapt existing data collection systems so they can capture these different contributions. So we can break down the data, have disaggregated data on investment, commerce, tourism, philanthropy, and be able to account for them according to the diaspora or migration status of the sender or the person providing the funds. For example, our country has a system of identification of diasporas, and we have controls on currency exchange. So there are some actions or techniques the country can carry out based on the local context. And we also have a toolbox to facilitate this process. And we have different then steps to do so and options. And I want to share with you a few of the case studies in this handbook. And in Egypt, we have that a new business or new expansion of business, they have to fill out this form, and they have to share citizenship and place of residence of the shareholders of the companies that are being incorporated or expanded in the country. So that can give you a bit of information of what this entails for the Egyptian population abroad, for example, regarding businesses and entrepreneurship and the development of the private sector in the country. Another one is Morocco, where they have a system to calculate how much Moroccans spend on tourism in the country. And we can see contribution per country of residence of Moroccans abroad. So it has a very detailed uh, data collection on tourism, and that can serve to maximize the impact of these tourism income for the economy of Morocco. And the last example would be from a bank in Kenya. called Equity Bank. And what they do is they have accounts for members of the diaspora, but they depend on the registration that the person is from the diaspora. They also look at the country code of the phone number to identify who's living abroad to assign the account to a diaspora member or to a resident, a Kenyan resident. And using that data tracking system, if you will, the bank has been able to identify over 30,000 accounts with over $35 million in terms of loans and in 35 million loans and 45 million in savings in Kenya from the diaspora. And that is going to be the end. I know it was a bit quick, and I'm going to share the link in the chat. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Cassell, for your very interesting presentation. We are going to have questions after the next presentation. Now I'm going to introduce Sonia Plaza. She is a World Bank expert who's going to talk about the evolution of international remittances. She's a senior economist in the finance, competitive, and innovation global practice of the World Bank, also co-chair of the Diaspora Thematic Working Group of NOMAD, which is the Global Knowledge Partnership on Migration and Development. She was talked about or advised many universities on transfer of skills and tapping into the diaspora's potential. She attended University of Lima, earned a degree in economics. Then she joined Chase Manhattan Bank and was then invited to join the Peruvian Ministry of Trade. She has a dual degree from Yale University and Penn U in International Economics and Development. She was professor of economics at the Peruvian School of the Foreign Service and the University of Lima, and was adjunct faculty in microeconomics and macroeconomics at the American University in Washington. Her interests include research in international migration, labor mobility, trade, and future of work. She joined the Institute for the Study of Labor as research fellow in February 2010. So I would like to
Muchísimas gracias y es un placer estar
Sonia
con
the
todos
floor.
ustedes. Como les mencionaba al principio, es un placer
Thank you.
estar
It is a pleasure being with you
con el foro de discusión de
and
las
being again in the CRM discussion forum and with the organizations. Uh, uh, my area of expertise is remittances and diaspora. I really like about the previous presentation on how to improve and account for the contribution of the diaspora. And in celebration, in the day of international remittances, I'm going to present to you what has happened with remittances during the pandemic and why in Latin America we have been a bit more resilient vis-a-vis the COVID-19 pandemic. And look at that also at development through the migration lens. And it is going to be based on the migration development and brief that we just released in April, and I'm going to give you the link in the chat. So let's start on the key messages that we want to convey. When we had the crisis, we had many estimates, and they indicated that remittances were going to plummet. But we know that remittances are usually resilient during times of crisis, especially when you have natural disasters or when we have, let's say, hurricanes that we had this year. and they were resilient. Instead of dropping precipitously, they only had a slight 1.6% dip in 2020 globally. For 2021 and 2022, we think that they are going to grow instead. But there are still some risks in the estimate, so there could be a downside. So we need global efforts to keep remittances flowing and to help migrants by including them in all the different COVID-19 responses and policies. Of course, remittances need to keep flowing, very important, but where we have to play a major role is with diaspora. As our previous speaker said, diaspora has to help rebuild better the economies after COVID-19. And how? Strengthening
La
and
diáspora no solamente es remesas,
making visible the contributions of diasporas. Remittances go to families, but they also contribute with foreign trade, direct investment, technology and knowledge, tourism, and philanthropy, and other community-based contributions. Mexico has tried to account for the contributions regarding technology transfers, and CONACYT also tried to bring Mexican diaspora to bring investment and technology back to the country. It is difficult to see for technology transfer, but we can see it in a more relevant manner. For example, when we had Ebola and now with COVID-19, what happened? In the global level, all the diasporas connected and they are providing help and knowledge to their countries of origin. For example, for Ebola, all doctors from Sierra Leone and Liberia would Skype with doctors in their home country to see how to deal with the disease. And right now, we've seen thousands of remote meetings where diaspora can provide knowledge and technology to those doctors responding in their countries of origin. So the contributions of diaspora are beyond remittances. They include trade, technology, investment, philanthropy, tourism. And most importantly, we're not only considering the diaspora, which would be
diáspora no
trained
calificada
personnel
y la
or
diáspora que está
qualified labor, the unqualified labor, and the one that is in the countries of the Southern Hemisphere, not only the US and Europe. For example, we have a lot of diaspora in our own country. In Peru, we have people from Argentina, Venezuela, and China, and Mexico has a lot of Argentinians, Peruvians, etc., and they will contribute. So that is my point of view. Those are the messages that we have to send. Next slide is going to show what happened. Look at the resilience. As you can see in this graph, remittances continue to grow, but all the other flows, FDI and official development assistance, was static. Foreign direct investment really dropped, but remittances grew. They were the ones who shored up at the international level the economies. And if we don't consider China, because they have a lot of FDIs, look at how they drop. So what are we seeing here? Of all the regions in the world where we have seen the impact of remittances on the crisis, the only region where we had them grow and where they were very resilient was Latin America. In 2020, remittances grew by 6.5%. And for the rest of the region, it went down, with the exception of South Asia, sorry, and a bit for Middle East and North Africa.
Y los países de
Sub-Saharan Africa
también cayeron y sufrieron.
and Central European Asia had a big drop, as well as the East Asia and Pacific. But Latin America grew by 6.5%, and the estimates are going to be almost 5% for 2021 and 4% for 2022. And compared with the 2018 financial crisis, we did not go down, but actually went up a bit. Regarding the total flow of remittances is India, China, and then we have Mexico, and then you have Philippines, Pakistan, etc. But in terms of what they represent as a percentage of GDP, the smaller countries depend more heavily on remittances. And for Latin America and Central America would be Honduras and El Salvador, which is about a quarter of their GDP is from remittances, as well as Haiti and Jamaica. They're a sizable portion. And you can see the behavior of what happened with the remittances for Mexico, Central America, and the RCM countries. And you can see that for Latin America, we can see there was a V-shaped recovery. You can see that all remittances, with the notable exception of Mexico, which had a different behavior, remittances collapsed when COVID started. March, April, May, and when they started reopening and they recovered and they continue growing. And we are going to see this recovery with data to May. Dominican Republic and Guatemala, and they have a big increase, as well as El Salvador. Compared with the other regions of the world, you can see Latin America keeps growing in terms of remittances. East Asia, Pacific, Europe, Central Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa seeing the biggest drops. And in the second quarter of 2020, all countries, with the exception of Mexico, where we saw a small growth, they collapsed because the movement of people carrying remittances and operations, because a lot of remittance transfer centers were closed. Not only the countries of origin from where remittances are sent, but also the countries of destination. So that's why they collapsed. We see in the third and the fourth quarter, you can see a recovery, and this recovery has continued, and mostly in Central America and Mexico. And it will include Jamaica and Dominican Republic. For some Andean countries, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Paraguay, the recovery has not been as strong because they have a lot of immigrants in Spain, which was really affected by COVID, but with high unemployment. So we see variation with countries. So what are the reasons behind this resilience of remittances? We know migrants sacrifice to continue supporting their families. And they may even stop eating a bit, or they crowd in an apartment so they can save and send remittances. And the measurements the countries of destination gave supported the notion that many migrants received support making it possible for them to send remittances. And many migrants from Latin America and Mexico were working in what's called essential services that closed for about a month or so and immediately reopened. And they had to support the rest by deliveries, etc., and the cleaning services and transportation. And this supported workers of Central America and Mexico uh, to recover in terms of remittances. And there was better recovery, and in many countries, especially the US, as we have seen. And when we estimated economic growth, we had a negative growth outlook. The US was going to go down by about 6%, but the GDP went down just by 3.5%. And now we are expecting 6.4% recovery or growth. And we see what happened with the US. Employment for Hispanic migrants and other foreigners dropped strongly, much more so than compared with US citizens in April of last year. So, but as the economy reopened and grew, now we see a much closer gap, but we still have not reached pre-pandemic levels. And to give a bit more, as I was mentioning, how migrants will sacrifice, and we have countercyclical fiscal policies in many bigger host countries. So migrants were there able to continue working and sending, and we had a better than expected economic recovery in many of these countries. And we have seen a shift from cash to digital and from informal to formal channels. This has been in all countries of the world and many Mexico and Central America, because many would go back to their country's origin with the money. But since the borders closed and many remittance centers closed, they had to go with digital transfers. Was this positive or not? Well, it was positive because now we can use new technologies, and supposedly this should reduce the cost of remittances, but I have not seen any decrease in the cost of remittances for Latin America, even if everything were transferred digitally. Now, regarding transfer from cash to electronic transfers and from informal to formal channels, we see in the World Bank surveys of households, we see that most households report a decrease in the second quarter. Mexico, 35% and 54% of households reported lower remittances, but the, the central banks see an increase in remittances because informal remittances are not that well captured. A lot of the flows have been through informal channels, and now they're using formal. And now let's go to Mexico. We had a big increase because there was a devaluation of the peso. Uh, in March of last year was almost at 25 pesos per dollar. And for example, when I was in Mexico a few years ago, the lowest peso would be 12. And this created a displacement of the volume of remittances. The, to April of this year, we have seen the biggest increase year to date since 2002 that we have the data. So as you can see, we have a promising future and the outlook looks positive. We see about for next year, for this year, we're going to see a 5 increased growth. And most of the regions should be recovering, except Sub-Saharan Africa and Eastern Europe. But we still have some risks, and we see a positive outlook, and we see that Guatemala has a big increase for May, and also Dominican Republic. And what we see that there are risks. We could have a new outbreak of COVID-19, and we also need to have vaccination. And Central America and Mexico and Dominican Republic not only are countries that send migrants, they are also receiving migrants now. And many of them are in transit. So many of the policies, they need to include migrants in transit, especially for vaccination. And the shift of remittances from cash to digital transfers or digital means will slow down unless we do something to increase access to banking. And we don't know whether it will continue. I'm going to give you an example. I used to send remittances by cash. I would go to the supermarket and deposit them. Then I had to send digital with COVID. I do not know how many roadblocks. We have a very nice system to transfer. And I have problems 4 years later and it still has not arrived. Better bring your money in cash. So how effective digital is? And I have a formal employment, I have bank account, etc. And many of the migrants do not have those benefits. So many migrants do not have access to bank account, and that also has negative impact on migrants. And many of the support of the counter-cyclical support measures will not continue, which can have an impact if we don't have economic recovery in the countries where migrants are. Oil prices and currency exchanges are volatile. And we've seen that El Salvador has formalized Bitcoin as a currency. And finally, we have a negative sentiment against migrants because there is competition for jobs, and we have these negative views. And if that continues, this can affect the flow of migrants, and that can affect in turn remittances. And finally, I was talking about the cost of remittances and still said, talked about the SDGs, the indicators for these sustainable development goals. And we're talking about 6.1, we have to reduce the cost of remittances to 3% by 2030. The cost for Latin America has been constant for the last 10 years, 5 years, uh, from 5%, from 5.6%. It should be 3%. And if it's through digital means, it should be even lower because digital does not cost that much. But that cost has not been translated into benefits for those sending. We need more platforms and interoperability between banks, payment systems to prevent exclusive contracts. I can give you a concrete example. When a big remittance company had a contract with Electra, once the contract ended, the remittances really went down in terms of cost. So if anybody who can offer the services can offer them, we can have competition, healthy competition to avoid monopolies because that keeps prices high. And finally, we have some, corridors that are very expensive. From Spain to Dominican Republic have gone a bit down, but from the Dominican Republic to Haiti are incredibly high in terms of cost. I mean, sending remittances from Dominican Republic to Haiti is almost 10%. It is still high. US to Cuba, 10%. Brazil to Peru, their neighboring countries. And Japan to Brazil is by bank, and that could be costlier. But from my country, from the US to Peru would be 4%. I would like that to be 3%. Now, regarding the measures to support remittances, global call or initiative to facilitate remittances in times of COVID was started by the UK and Swiss governments, calling different organizations, including Nomad, World Bank, UNCPF, UNDP, so flows can continue and to have this. And we are going to have an event in July so we can see what is being done to facilitate remittances. And it's very important to keep supporting migrants, especially those who have been stranded in host countries, provide vaccinations, health and education, and a lot of attention should be paid to returnees because they have been deported or because they don't have work anymore there. And how can we can reincorporate them into the productive fabric of the country, and to give support to the families and especially social services to those families that have been left behind. And regarding remittances, we need timely data and the different channels used. Before, El Salvador and Honduras were accounting for the remittances on a monthly basis. Some did it quarterly. Now we can monitor remittances every day because it is very important at the macro level, and it helps with balance payment, of course. And also we have policies against money laundering and financing of terrorism, of course. So that has resulted in closing of many accounts of these remittance company with the forwarding banks. So we need support for inboarding. especially regarding online transfers. And we have to take into account the factors to be taken into account so migrants and their family can access bank accounts with certain requirements for digital services. And I would like to say that many countries, and the most important thing for remittances is not only their flow, but how we design financial products so the diaspora can use these remittances. They help families. They're a private source of funding, but they're also um, savings of the diaspora abroad. For example, the diaspora of Comoros in Paris, it is usually unskilled labor, and they have an incredible percentage of savings. They look an opportunity for investment. They do that. So Equity Bank in Kenya has these special accounts to attract the diaspora and tailor some products for them. And their investment in construction, and that's Kenya. If you want to go to work in Somalia, they don't want to work in Somalia, but the banks in Somalia also have accounts for the diaspora. I work in Somalia, and their diaspora has invested a lot in telecommunications there. So it is very important for us to talk about experiences in other countries. Uh, Rosh Hashanah accounts in Pakistan are also for diaspora, and Nigeria has diaspora bonds. So good financial instruments to help investment in infrastructure in those countries of origin. And I'm really happy about the initiative to account for the contributions of the diaspora because many of them can be intangible, but I think that we see some policies and we should not create distortions and policies that are incoherent. For example, we have a lot of remittances. Let's tax them. That is a distortion. No taxes, nor for sending, nor for receiving. Neither for sending nor for receiving. Or to give too many benefits to diaspora, for example, tax credits, and that can create tensions because their own nationals who have stayed in the country would not accept that because it also creates distortion. They tried it before, didn't work, and they're revisiting it again. So I would like then to end by sending a call to continue the discussion on how to support remittances, mobilize diaspora in the different countries, the northern or southern hemisphere, so they can contribute to development. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Palazza. I know we would have a round of applause if we were in person. Please stay, and Mr. Cancel, we have a couple of minutes for questions, and we would really like to make the best out of this. We have Mr. Cancel who shared the link, and we have a question for Mrs. Plaza from Rubén Chávez, Mexico. How about the hypothesis of some media in Latin America that remittances are used by organized crime for money laundering, which would explain their low dip and fast recovery after COVID-19? Could you please repeat it? The questions in the chat. There's a hypothesis in some media that in Latin America, remittances have been used for money laundering, which would explain the low impact on remittances
No tengo números, no
of
puedo hablar sin números,
COVID-19
pero te digo, trabajo
and
mucho
fast
en lo
recovery.
que es lavado de
I can tell you that I work in money laundering a lot
terrorismo. Yo no sé si los
and
montos que están
terrorism
hablando de
financing.
$200,
I
$250
don't
por
think
montos
that 25 or $200 would be for money laundering.
no, o sea,
Of
no es
course,
lavado de dinero, son
we
pequeñitos
could
montos,
have,
no creo que vaya para terrorismo.
I don't think that they would go
Habría
for
que ver si
terrorism
es que hay un
and money
estudio.
laundering.
Yo
We
trabajo en
might
Somalia.
have a study. In
Cada
Somalia,
uno salen reportes que
we have reports all over the place.
probar que
So
no
they have not been able
montos muy
to
pequeñitos.
prove
Habría que
that.
ver
Very, very small sums.
Muchas gracias. Honduras está escribiendo una pregunta para Roberto Cancel.
Honduras is writing a question for Mr. Cancel, or if you want to open your mic and camera, you can do that.
Sí, muchísimas gracias, Luis
Thank you.
Alonso. Quisiera agradecer los dos ponentes
I
porque
would like to thank both
fueron excelentes.
speakers
Roberto, muchísimas gracias. Y Sonia, de verdad,
and Roberto and Sonia.
bueno, nosotros
Excellent
escuchamos
presentation.
varios colegas
We've heard many colleagues
presentaciones
talking
sobre
about
pero
the
la tuya
topic,
de verdad ha sido excepcional. Es decir,
but yours has
la
been exceptional.
comparación de los varios
The
datos,
comparison between the different data.
tomando prácticamente fotografía.
Yeah, I have been
Y espero que tú puedas
taking photographs, and I hope that you can share that presentation with us, because these are great arguments and are arguments that I use rather frequently. Something that I missed, I think, the last you said about why not give special treatment to the diaspora, because it could be counterproductive to tax remittances, as we've seen. Many countries in the region, and especially in the Caribbean, and that has really been frightening. But if you can tell me why we should not have a special treatment for diasporas. I agree with you, but I would like to know a bit more about the rationale.
¿Respondo o hacemos una ronda de preguntas?
Do I answer? Yeah, you can answer, because the next two questions are for Roberto. Thank you. A bit about the work that we've done with Global Diaspora, and we have seen reports for diaspora, and we see voting rights. Many countries don't accept voting abroad. Mexico, my country, do accept it. Many countries don't. Dual citizenship, many countries also don't accept the, dual nationality. Germany, if you go to Germany, you have to renounce your nationality to become German. And they also want security, they want protection investments. So what I was saying is, Michaela, when we're talking about those who stayed in the country, and they're saying those who left and come back, they're giving unfair advantage, and that could cause tension. We tried that in the 70s, when in the 70s you can come back, you're going to have some tax credits, etc., and did not work well. So it's better to have a level playing field for everybody, and we've seen it in different countries. That was my point of view. Thank you, Sonia. Michela, Roberto, a question from Honduras. How were you able to educate countries of origin to attract investment? And the study identified the contribution to the Mexican diaspora?
empezar con la segunda, entonces
the second, and then we'll go with the first.
importante resaltar,
And
que, como dije, hablé quizás muy rápido.
maybe
El
I
documento
spoke
que
rather quickly.
no es un reporte.
The document is not a report, it's a guideline.
Herramientas a los gobiernos para poder incorporar
And we have
desglosar los
to
datos que están
incorporate
recopilando, sea
methods
Banco Central, en términos de inversión del extranjero, o
and
Ministerio de Finanzas, la aduana, en términos de comercio.
so we need
De recolectar datos.
to have
La guía
data connection methods.
preguntas,
The guideline has options to integrate questions or steps to use these existing data collection systems so we can account for these other transactions. And which of these other transactions outside of remittances are from members of the diaspora. So the guideline or the handbook does have some case studies, but it's not a study per se. It is not a report of different countries and their impact. It's more like a methodological guide to be able to integrate these recommendations into the data gathering mechanisms of the different countries so we can account for those other contributions. And they can use the different steps based on their different contexts and systems. So which could be feasible to integrate into their own data gathering systems. Now, if you have any questions about implementation of this guide, you can contact me or your IOM office on how we have educated countries of origin to attract investment. As we said before,
entender que si
is
queremos
we have to understand
tenemos que hablarle a la gente como inversionistas.
about investments. We have to talk to people as investments.
Ejemplo muy concreto, y cuando yo estaba trabajando en Kosovo, estaba haciendo
When I was working in
reuniones
Kosovo
con empresarios de Kosovo
and
en el exterior.
was holding meeting with Kosovan
Mira,
business people abroad. And one told me, look, I'm tired about my obligation to my country of origin. I've been sending remittance for over a decade. Tell me what the opportunities are in my country so I can do business in my country of origin. Then I'm willing to participate. I'm interested. So, as Ms. Plaza said, they want security for their investment. They want the rule of law, and so they investment can be secured. I mean, any investor would ask you for safety for their investment. And of course, maybe repairing physical infrastructure may not be possible, but we can create industrial parks or what we call free trade zones in some areas where you can have certain infrastructure for investments, and you can couple that with some tax incentives if they generate X number of jobs. For example, you can have an X% decrease in, let's say, income tax. And these are some of the programs that I will see in different countries. And I also investment promotion agencies, and these agencies may try to grow closer ties with certain diasporas so they can produce documents in their own native languages or sending information to the diaspora in the host country so they can promote these in a targeted manner for the diasporas. although the investors, all investors would have the same benefits, you could target the opportunities to the diaspora. And finally, we have a comment from Mexico. Voting is still a sensitive issue. Voting abroad has been possible for Mexicans since 2006. Unfortunately, the number of people who exercise that right are very few. That's why we may have an issue with political culture instead of mechanisms to exercise your right to vote. So, yes, thank you very much. I'm from Peru. I just suffered that electoral process where many times voters cannot vote because sometimes the consulate is very far away, and so they cannot exercise that right, or they still have an old address in another state of the US, for example, or they still have their Peruvian address, or they're no longer interested because they have assimilated more into their host countries. And not only by what the previous speaker said, talking about promotion agencies and consulates and embassies have to get closer to the diasporas. For example, Israel and Ireland have done so, and they still have the diaspora and how they promote that so they can contribute to the development of their home country. So I fully agree.
Don Alfonso Pérez, le voy a pedir si puede anotar su pregunta en el chat, porque ya estamos con el tiempo muy limitado.
Can you use the chat, please? Because we have very limited time. And regarding voting abroad, Guatemalans can vote abroad. In the previous election, and only 2% participated. Right now, outside of the consulate of Guatemala, of 6,000 Guatemalans registered, only 257 voted in Los Angeles. It's not that the diaspora does not participate, but the electoral tribunal did not inform about that to the community, Guatemala. Well, once again, I would like to thank Sonia and Alfonso, and would like to thank Robert and Sonia for the presentations, and we will continue with the agenda. And we need to improve, talk about transfers, and Michela Machiavello, she's a regional specialist of IM in labor migration and human development. Michela, you have the floor, so you go with this next panel. Thank you. Thank you, Alonso. Alonso. Okay, it's a pleasure to greet of the RCM Technical Secretariat and the government of Mexico as the PPT. In this panel, we are going to have different people of high stature. I'm honored to be with them. It is a 50-minute panel. We are a bit behind, so we're going to try to make it a bit quicker. We should have a space for Q&A. It is very important, especially looking at how participants have responded to the two excellent panelists we've had. So, without further ado, let's start. It is a panel focused on through, and we're going to talk then about the productive use of remittances, which ties in nicely to the previous presentations. And especially for transfers, we have a very high cost. The Global Compact say that it should be about 3%. And in fact, and as we've seen here, we've seen that many are virtual and should be much lower when they're digital, right? And we have a list of 5 panelists that I'm going to quickly introduce, but maybe they can have a couple of minutes to introduce themselves and what they are going to talk about. We have Elias Romero, and he is from Bank of Mexico. Elias, Miguel Arevalo for assistance services for refugees and migrants. We have my colleague, Paris Fernandez, who is the senior specialist on migration and development of IAM based in Geneva. And we have Luis Predosa, who is a researcher from the Culture of Mexico, and Isabel Cruz from the Migrant Project from or Proyecto Migrante from Mexico. And then you have the floor, so you can briefly present your experience on remittances. And we can say that we can start with Elias.
Perdón, buenos días. No sé quién es Elías, pero creo que se refiere a la persona del Banco de México que...
Yeah, the person from Bank of Mexico. I have an issue because please, Aldo Hefner, I'm sorry for the error. Thank you for the possibility of participating in this forum. Always a pleasure to learn about different aspects of migrants, diaspora, and civil society. I'm the Director of Economic Measurement in the Bank of Mexico. We're in charge of gathering information on remittances used for the balance of payments, of course, and it would be the official information used by the country. So it is both statistical and other types of follow-up for related aspects and topics regarding migration and economic activity to have more or better idea about the movement of these remittances. Thank you. Now we have Miguel, please. You have the floor. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation to this forum. I'm an immigrant in Montreal for a long time. We have been working with migration services for about 25 to 30 years with the different diasporas that come to this country, both from Africa, Asia, Caribbean, and other parts of Latin America, and mainly El Salvador. Also, we have some partners in Europe, Spain, Italy, mainly, and the US. Our experience has been providing services to migrants and looking at all the problems they face when they come to a new country. And that connection or relationship we still keep with our countries of origin, especially regarding financial, economic matters, because as the presenter said below, before,
además de los sacrificios,
Sonia, in addition to the sacrifices the diaspora does in the host countries, we are always thinking about the families left behind, the countries, and trying to help them. That would be all for now. It's going to be a pleasure to participate with you. Thank you, Miguel. Now we go, Dipali, Fernanda. You have the floor, Dipali.
Thank you, Michaela, and a very good morning to everybody. Thank you for this invitation to participate in this panel discussion. My name is Dipali Fernandez, and I work with IOM in Geneva at the headquarters. We work on essentially the trade, entrepreneurship, remittances, and financial aspects of migration, essentially the economic contributions, focusing on working with migrants and the families left behind, along with my colleagues, Michela, Roberto, and many of our other colleagues all over the globe on very specific initiatives and projects. Thank you.
Excellent, Dipali. Muchas gracias, Dipali.
Thank you, Dipali. We will continue. Luisi, you have the floor. Morning, all. Thank you for this invitation. It is a pleasure to participate in this panel. Thank you to the Technical Secretariat, Secretary of the RCM and Mexico as PPT. I represent academia in this panel, but I'm not, as most of you are, I'm not an economist. I'm a political scientist. And that is my perspective on the study of remittances as one of the many economic policies that countries of origin have with their diasporas. I have written about combining economic policies, taking into account the diasporas for countries in Latin America, and a book where we study a series of policies for diasporas, including economic ones. So it's going to be a pleasure to share with you some of that diversity and complexity. Thank you, Lucy. We are really looking forward to your participations. So let's continue. I have two rounds of questions. Let's see what we can do with, because we don't have a lot of time. So I propose the following: a round of questions for everybody, and you can use about 5 minutes for the answer. And then if we have any time left, we will go to the next round, during which whether we can have the opportunity of a second questions, or will have to select 1 or 2 questions for one of the panelists. Aldo, Mr. Hefner, your question is the following. In 2020, as Sonia said, we estimated a significant drop in international remittances due to COVID-19. However, fortunately, the data show positive evolution, even increases year to date. And that's the case for a region. For you, what do you think is the cause of this positive evolution? Given Sonia's presentation, I will be able to be even more brief because Sonia has said a lot with her presentation. We really were fearing the worst at the beginning of the pandemic, and the expectation was based on the finance crash of 2008, where we did see a big dip in remittances, and it took about 8 or 10 years to go to the previous levels. But this was a different crisis. It was a healthcare issue. It was not an economic issue. So this gives another characteristic to this crisis. And we saw resilience. And one of the main differences was the fast response of many countries, including the US. And the US contributes about 95% of remittances. So their fast response helps them this precipitous drop in remittances. The US expanded employment benefits, had direct transfers. So some people were able to receive help even though they were self-employed, something that did not happen before. And sometimes these contributions were even higher to what some workers usually received. So many people were able to maintain their income flows. Many families may have had to dip in regarding their savings. However, many cases, there were conditions to keep remittances flowing. And when we're talking about the depreciation of the peso and the desire of many countries in the US to keep supporting their families in Mexico. So that can basically explain the resilience. And these factors have been supported by others, like reactivation in the US, especially in services and construction. And the depreciation has gone, but the other factors have kept the resilience. And an important issue that the undocumented fraction of migrants from Mexico has been going down, and regular migrants are on the rise. So they are also having some political incidents in the country, and they can use formal channels. And I think also that the geographic closeness has helped maintain the bonds and to keep the continuity of these flows and even account for their increase. That would be all. Thank you. Thank you. I like the first say that this was a health issue, not an economic shock, but a health shock. And you underscore the importance of a fast, almost immediate response in the US, and the fact that many migrants have been able to keep their income. Also, conditions were continued, and they would continue to promote or maintain the flow of remittances. And as Sonia said, the devaluation of the peso also helped in this regard. And then a resilience of families and geographic closeness should also be underscored. Miguel Arevalo, the question is the following. Can you tell us the challenges or obstacles diasporas usually face to send remittances efficiently and in a timely fashion? Miguel, you have the floor. Thank you. It's a privilege to talk in the name of the diaspora, because you have many countries, many cultures, many ways of thinking. With organizations, we work with mainly Latin America, Central America, and Mexico, mostly. It is great that Sonia also gave great information regarding the issue of diasporas that they face. And what we were talking about is that the cost is very high, and everybody has to understand it. When I'm saying everybody, should be the intermediaries, financial organizations, even governments. For example, in Mexico, we're saying 6%, and many people don't have an account in a bank. A bank account is essential. The average cost of a remittance is about, if remittance is usually 1,200 pesos, and then you would have 70 pesos of cost. You have 2 million remittances per, let's say, month, would be 135 million pesos of profit per month, about 1.5 billion per year. There's a lot of money, and many people want to help their families. So I think financial institutions and intermediaries or the governments have to work with them to have a better cost and accessibility for us. And we have proposals and studies as the ones you mentioned, and as Roberto mentioned as well, and countries and talking about laws to help craft laws to satisfy the needs, for example, of the beneficiary communities, for example, as a credit, because the people who receive remittances are not subject of credit. So this legislation could help us overcome this contradiction. They contribute through remittances, but they don't have access to funds for investment. And that is the big challenge that we have right now, post-pandemic. And And so part of that has to go through remittances for investment. Could be businesses. And in the strategies Roberto was saying, funds for that investment should be used to invest in goods and services for the benefit of the community. And as you can
las
see,
situaciones políticas. Ustedes saben
we see
de
the political situation. I'm from El Salvador, for example. Right now, we are sending dollars. In future, we're going to be sending Bitcoin because a country that accepts legal tender can change the situation. But let's look at the other positive side. I know how the market will relate to this and all these costs that are going to be in a new modality for investment. And why not use it? But we could do it with dollars and euro or Canadian dollars or other strong currencies that from which or we are sending to our countries. So it is very important that costs go down, and they've invested in social programs or businesses and enterprises.
también que ciertos porcentajes
So certain percentages could be earmarked for the social development of our people. Thank you, Miguel. Very relevant topics. As we have about 6%, Sonia, about 88, 10%. It's very big.
Desproporcionado, ¿no? Y lo que usted dijo, que justamente el papel que los gobiernos deberían
And
jugar
the
acá,
role the governments play is very important. They should develop policies to overcome these contradictions, giving more access to credit.
me gustó mucho también la referencia que hizo a su país justamente con la posibilidad que puede ser algo real que
And
a enviar bitcoins o otras
something in future,
instrumentos
for example, cryptocurrencies may be
bueno
used in future.
pusimos sobre todo lo que
And especially
puedan ser investidos y beneficios para
this
todos, ¿no?
can be invested.
Que yo encuentro puede
But
ser
what I think is most important of what you said,
limitar los costos
we needed to reduce costs in a new investment modalities, or we could use
de ellos
part of these costs in social
esto me parece que
investment.
definitivamente se tenga que subrayar de manera dura.
And this should be
Muchísimas gracias, don Miguel. Y
stressed.
entonces
Thank you,
a
Miguel.
mi
And
colega Dipali.
we'll then go with
Paso
Dipali.
a hablar
She's going to talk
del
about
sector por lo que
topic in English.
necesita
So
traducción en esta plataforma de traducción, como los
you
pueden
know, we have interpretation.
Mi
So,
pregunta va a ser en
and
español
my
para
question isn't going to
entender.
be in Spanish. So
Dipali,
here it
esta
is.
es tu pregunta.
This is your question,
Existen
Dipali.
diferentes foros y
There are
procesos
different
globales que
fora
promueven
and global processes promoting dialogue
en
and
materia
joint
de
actions
recursos y
regarding
desarrollo.
remittances and development.
Decirnos o
Can you please
mencionar
tell us or mention
cuáles son estos foros y la importancia
which
de sus
fora
países?
they are
Muchas
and their
gracias, Dipali.
importance to their countries? Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Michaela. Absolutely. I mean, given, I'm sure, what Sonia and Roberto also mentioned earlier, the importance of remittances and the fact that they go directly to people in terms of development impact. The international community has, for nearly over a decade, been setting up different forums and different groups Probably the most noteworthy ones are one is set up by IFAD, which is the Global Forum on Remittance Investment and Development, which is ongoing today and tomorrow. It's largely private sector and regulator focused, and it discusses what are the latest trends, what are the different issues, what needs to be taken into consideration. We also have the World Bank's Nomad Group, which does a lot of excellent work on research, on the policy side, on the data side of things as well, as Sonia's great presentation earlier must have demonstrated as well. So you have these two very key groups that bring together primarily private sector, primarily regulators, international organizations. You also have the UN level, you have the financing for development process, which looks at different forms of external finance for SDGs. So that's debt, it's trade, it's investment, but also again, remittances. The G20 is a smaller group, but it looks at remittances from the financial side, and it has remittance plans. And it also looks at remittances from the migration and displacement side in terms of the connection with diaspora, in terms of the connections and points of conflict and areas such as that. The private sector, you have the International Association of Money Transfer Networks that at least till about a year ago, I don't know what's happened post-COVID, used to have regional fora meetings on remittances primarily for the private sector. You have at the state-specific level, you have the Global Forum on Migration and Development. You have, during COVID, the Swiss-UK Call to Action, which did an excellent job of raising some of the key issues on facing the international community on remittances. And more recently, you have the UN Migration Network, which through its Objective 19 and 20 focuses on remittances and diaspora economic contribution. So some of the key contributions of all these fora have been basically, one is to identify the new trends and look at what's coming up. So we've seen, for instance, digitization, impact of lockdown measures, mobile money, cryptocurrencies. You have the sharing of best practices at the national level. Many governments have a lot of good practices they put in place. So what are those practices and how can we learn from them? You find that they are, problems that are identified and solutions that are found just by discussion. And then you have partnerships that are established between private sector, among private sector and public sector, and hopefully more and more between migrant and diaspora associations and private and public sector. So yes, so there's a lot of work that happens, a lot of lobbying also that's done on key issues. Yeah, I would say a lot of progress within these fora. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Dipali, por esta lista.
Thank you, Dipali, for this comprehensive list of what we have. Of what you said, there's a lot more that's being done at the moment. So there's a lot going on that is still not defined. I am going to repeat some of the most important groups that we have, which that are going to be taken into account. They have to be taken into account as key aspects of on all of us who are interested in diasporas, transfers, etc., and should be considering that. We can talk the group created by IFAD, which is the Global Forum on Remittance and Development, and the Nomad Group of the World Bank, which is extraordinary in terms of research and policy. I also have to underscore what the private sector is doing with the creation of the International Society for Remittance or International Association of Money Transfer, which has to be continued in terms of monitoring and the importance of creating of the UN network on migration, of which IOM is the secretariat, especially regarding objectives 19 and 20. Now let's go to Isabel Cruz.
Perdón.
Isabel, I would like to say that Isabel had a problem. So with Luis de Pedrosa, she's waiting, and that's your question. Which initiatives, mechanisms, or programs can we promote for productive use of remittances? Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Lucy, you have the floor. Thank you. First of all,
la pura captación de remesas y que estemos discutiendo el cómo de la transferencia.
and it's great that we are now discussing the how. So they are, and the what for. It's great to have that discussion, and I congratulate everybody. And Roberto Cancela and Sonia Plaza for their excellent contributions that have already underscored certain points, especially controversy on mainly regarding government strategies focused mainly or solely on remittances. So there is also a diversity of contributions by diaspora beyond remittances, as mentioned by Sonia. I would like to remind everybody
Un retrato difuso respecto a la deseabilidad de políticas orientadas al envío de remesas, porque del lado positivo
panorama which is kind of blurry sometimes regarding policies for remittances because they can alleviate poverty, break poverty cycles, help with nutrition, etc. Provide financial security, allow for certain investments for migrant families, which would not be possible without their contributions through remittances with their corresponding multiplying effect in their communities. Many of these are potential effects, but we also have studies that in the short term, some of these effects could be modest and even negative in terms of increasing local inequality in the, within the community, or to strengthen certain hierarchical relationships. And what Mr. Cancel said is that there is an animated discussion in academia regarding the effects of remittances. So despite being welcomed by many international organizations, we still have a debate on the desirability of policies that are only centered on remittances without taking into account other perspectives like individual perspectives, human rights. And there is even a political stance by certain states or governments and agents, because there has been a warning on, for example, policies to capture remittances should recognize the private nature of this flow. That is also the declaration of Brasilia in 2011. Many countries from South America committed to avoid co-investment programs using remittances because they are considered private funds that should not be used by the government. So we have a divergence of opinions vis-a-vis co-development programs that Mexico and other countries have been pioneering. So we have this controversy. What we've tried to reveal is how true is that the main motive for these policies is to try to use these remittances or to extract from them or abuse them. We have publicly available data based on the Immigrant Policies Index, which had data on policies for the diaspora of 22 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean for 2015. So we question this abusive intention. We have interesting findings. And we saw that there is a repertoire of ways to use remittances. We can have special banking channels to avoid these huge tariffs from remittance companies or to directly control the rates that these companies charge. We also have initiatives to have new transfer channels that can be easy to use by those sending the funds and those receiving them. And we have different programs. Some allow migrants to open a joint account with a family living in the host country, like Provincia Oro 25 in Argentina, that a country that does not receive a lot of remittances. We have bigger programs in Brazil, which is called international remittances, among others, which are tied to bigger banks in Brazil. We have remittances for investments focused on the acquisition of real estate, like the My Home with remittances in Colombia. So you can pay your mortgage with remittances received from abroad. And also investment for rural development projects, such as invest in your own land in Mexico that gives loans so migrants can invest in Mexico, provided they have a co-investor or have a co-signature from someone in Mexico. And we can have policies of incentives for conversing with migrants. This is the 341 in Mexico. And this has been disappearing after 2 decades, which is a bit worrisome. And these programs have attracted a lot of interest from the international community because it generated investments that were 7 times bigger than those the local governments would have been able to carry out. So countries in Latin America and the Caribbean are not or do not appear to develop policies just to capture these resources. Their importance is undeniable, but there's just one part of the whole policies. We have combination of policies that can also be influenced by strategies to capture and technologies and talent. And in another round, we would like to talk about strategies, but for returnees. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, doña Luisi, por sus puntos efectivamente muy importantes y que quiero
something very important. We have few minutes, and Isabel Cruz has now joined. So I'm going to give her the time.
Señora Pedrosa, me parecen
talking are very important. And we still have blurred uh, issue regarding the desirability of remittances and what is being intended by these policies, especially when you are focusing just on remittances. And then we had another discussion in academia, but not only that, regarding how remittances should be used. And again, effectively, these are private funds, should not be used for or by governments, but there are several opportunities or possibilities offered to the diaspora and migrants so they can decide how to use their remittances so they can derive benefits. She gave examples of several countries like Brazil. Colombia would be investment in real estate and rural development, and in Mexico, and like I said, investing in your own land. And Luis, it is worrisome that 341 is effectively disappearing. As you said, it has been closely followed by international community. It would be fantastic to relaunch it because Mexico was the promoter and the country that taught the rest of the world about how to use this and how to operate this mechanism and improve it if necessary. And if we can perfect it, that would be great. But Mexico has all the information of lessons learned. And because they started from scratch. And so, and then 1 for 1, 2 for 1, 3 for 1. Very important development. So the few minutes that we have left, we have Isabel Cruz, so she can introduce herself. She works for the Migrant Bank project in Mexico, and at the same time, I'm going to ask her a question. And we have very little time, but um, I would like to hear more about the project. So your question is, can you tell us what the Migrant Bank project is and how it contributes to improve the contribution of the diaspora to the development of Mexico? Isabel, you have the floor. Thank you. Good afternoon. I had an issue with internet. I'd like to tell you that this project of the Migrants Bank is the result of a uh, long process by our association. We have been working in this for about 25 years, and 25 years later, we have a conclusion that we have presented. And I'm a specialist in finance, and I have looked at how remittances can help with the communities of origin. And now we have a proposal and allow remittances to become investments, including bigger investments in their communities of origin, including financial education with, and you know that diaspora keeps close ties with their countries of origin, especially indigenous diaspora groups. These are the different projects and research and even pilots. We have created local microbanks. We have a network of remittance payments, and we are providing banking for indigenous communities. That has resulting in several international prizes. So we have developed a concept that's called rural microbanks, and we were able to be recognized by law. So it is to achieve financial inclusion through savings, then credits, microinsurance, and means of payment. Now we have 24 of these financial organizations with 106 microbanks and branches in 16 states. They're mutuals, but they are included in the national financial system. And they started with this project of migrant bone, which allows migrants to have a savings account in a microbank in their community of origin. So they have incentives to contribute in 341 and other types of collective remittance projects that were geared to supporting their communities. With this mechanism of financial intermediation and social economy, we can help them and are helping them. We are giving them the highest rate in the market because as community financial institutions, it is very difficult for us to get credits, not even from the Development Bank of Mexico. So we work with savings only. So we are going to give them a competitive rate instead of giving that to commercial banks. But we designed a mechanism that these are small accumulated deposits. They send with great effort. So we can get from $50 and what they want to invest would be extra. And that is an innovation for investment to help them build a basis for savings. And it is for a year automatically renewed. 99% of the migrant bonds are renewed. And we are having financial banking, which works through an app to be mobile, which is used to open a remote account. They only need an ID, and they can give us, for example, the names of the neighbors that can attest that they live in a particular place if they don't have any other means to verify they live there. And right now, we are sending through traditional remittance company, but we are working with counterparts in the US so we can have remittances from a savings account in the US, which many of migrants do not have. So they can send money from their own or using their own cell phone. Unfortunately, they're sending me, yeah, sending. So this is the closing. We have the different organizations. So migrant bank. So it's a bank for banks, for migrants that requires a social switch to democratize means of payment. And we're not going to dwell on that, but we need to do the following for this project to be a reality. It has to be a diaspora project of the different migrant organizations in the communities of origin and the US. For us, what's important is to focus not only migrants, but also in family and community. And with mechanisms, we are including investment for migrants and investment. And this system has already given 666,000 credits with with $500 on average. So we're working with the poorest. So that is our
Muchísimas
project.
gracias,
Thank you
doña
very
Fernanda.
much.
Esto es de
Thank you.
verdad, lo dijo precisamente,
As we said before,
que es súper interesante
it
el
is
hecho
very
de
interesting. We really thank you
presentación que nos
for condensing your presentation.
Hay una persona con el micrófono abierto. Entonces,
Somebody is with an open microphone. Please close it.
gracias. Entonces, de la Secretaría Técnica
Also, on technical secretariat, we
sí
are being
identificaron y
asked
usted puede
if you
compartir
can
su presentación, así que podemos compartir los
show
slides.
your presentation.
Usted, sí, me dijo.
Unfortunately,
Desafortunadamente, no creo que tenemos campo para una
and
Luis Alonso, tú me dices de la Secretaría
Luis
Técnica,
Alonso,
creo que
you
ya
can tell
estamos
me.
20 minutos después de la hora. Luis Alonso,
And Luis Alonso, tell me.
tu consejo.
We're over time already. So what do you say?
Sí, Miquela, muchísimas gracias. Sé que es un poco
Thank you very
incómodo
much. It is
limitar a nuestros amables
unfortunately
panelistas con el tema del tiempo.
the time, but we have this. So as before your understanding, we will try to answer your questions. You can put them in the chat and then we will send them to the panelists for an answer. Thank you so much. And I have, it's choppy.
Gracias a todos por este diálogo.
Okay. Thank you everybody for this dialogue. Before we close, thank you. And you can close the presentation and you can send it to us. Before we close, I'm going to give the floor to IOM so they share a program announcement and then we are going to close.
Luis, muchísimas gracias, muy buenos días. Bueno, primero agradecer a
Well, thank you all. It is unfortunate that we have not been able to go deeper into discussion, but I want to, we are going to have a program for capacity building of diaspora organizations in Mesoamerica. So member countries represented in diaspora organizations to please be able to disseminate this training program. It is a result of some of the recommendations of the study we had yesterday and how to strengthen the organizational capability of the different organizations, and especially financial management. We are going to send this via email. The general objective is, of course, capacity building of diaspora organizations to improve their social and economic impact, and that's the most important aspect. The programs is to directly benefit 50 diaspora organizations. It's going to start in June 28th, finishing September 9th. You have to register using the form that you will access clicking. Remember, organization can only nominate 2 people to participate. We're going to have 4 areas: improving management structures for social entrepreneurship, financing, management of communication and marketing. We hope that these programs improve the capabilities of this organization in these different areas and bridge any gaps that they may have in those regards. Thank you. Thank you, Fabio. We are going to make this information available for you through the Miquela. Well, I cannot leave a panel. I have to thank our excellent panelists today. It has been a pleasure to be able to listen to your vision, to the different points of view. but I can help each of you. Unfortunately, I was not able to have more questions, and I am hopeful that if we have any future questions, we can make them available to the rest of the panelists.
Gracias,
Thank you so
Miquela,
much.
y por supuesto que estaremos profundizando este tema. Estamos cerrando de esta forma.
So we are closing these 2 days, and we know that's not much time, 2 hours per session, but let's hope to have them a bit more frequently and ideally in person. Now I would like to welcome Ruth Villanueva, General Director of Migrant Protection of the National Migration Institute of Mexico, so she can close this virtual session. And I want to address everybody, and the National Migration Institute is clear that these have been 2 excellent days of work. And I agree with everybody that has been excellent presentation. And not to take too much time, and we need to know or knowing in more detail what the diaspora is doing and which is calling us today. We have delved deeper about the need of having closer ties with these organizations and between them and government structures to guarantee conditions of both countries of origin and destination, how to work, where to go, with the participation of some people that said this topic of discussion for today was not only the material aspect that we see, but how and what for, how we can work to have better results with remittances, which have a very big impact. And somebody said Mexico had worked on some projects, and we needed to continue those and possibly perfect them. When we see all the different proposals, I think that there is importance, and we need to basically highlight all the contributions of the diaspora, both for countries of origin and destination, and the contribution of development through remittances, which is important to underscore that is not the only thing and not even the most important thing about their contributions. And all the different effects that they can have. And we've seen in Mexico, we have seen in Mexico and a pandemic, for example, that has been something unprecedented. But we've seen a situation that is different, where every country in the world has been affected. And so we have to continue with this work. And we need to continue making steps to keep a solid link and bond between our communities of origin and the migrant communities. Thank you all for your participation, for your attention, and our greetings of the Commissioner of Dr. Francisco Garcia, who is sending his regards. Thank you very much and good afternoon. Doctor, thank you. And to the working group, the labor migration, the Secretary of Labor and Social Welfare, and the Mexican Institute of Migration. Now we're going to go for a group photo, so please open your cameras so we can take a snapshot. I would like to thank again the PPT and the support and IOM.